The private jet shimmered like silver in the morning sun. It was supposed to be a smooth flight from New York to London, carrying only a handful of elite passengers. Among them sat Edward Callahan, a millionaire hotel tycoon known for his arrogance. And beside him, his 6-year-old son, Liam. Liam was deaf from birth. His world was quiet, painfully quiet. He could see lips move, faces twist, laughter echo through bodies, but never hear it. His mother had passed away 2 years ago. And since then, Liam's world had grown smaller, darker, sealed in silence. As the plane took off, Liam sat clutching his teddy bear. Edward was on his phone, arguing with his business partner, barely noticing his son's trembling hands. 10 minutes into the flight, Liam's face crumpled. Tears filled his eyes. Then came a soundless sob, his tiny shoulders shaking uncontrollably. The flight attendants rushed, offering toys, chocolates, juice, but nothing worked. Liam pushed everything away, crying harder, his breaths uneven, his fingers moving frantically in broken signs no one understood. The other passengers began to murmur, annoyed. Why doesn't he stop the kid? This is a private flight, not a daycare. Edward's face flushed with embarrassment. He knelt down beside Liam, trying to comfort him, but his son pushed him away, shaking his head violently. For the first time in years, Edward felt helpless. Money could buy silence, but not peace. Then, from across the aisle, a small, gentle voice spoke. Excuse me, sir. May I try? Edward turned. A little girl, about 8 years old, stood there clutching a pink backpack. Her brown curls bounced as she smiled softly. Her mother, sitting a seat behind, nodded reassuringly. Edward frowned. You? He can't hear you. The girl smiled again. I know, she whispered. And then she lifted her hands. Her fingers began to move, graceful, fluent, full of meaning. Liam froze. His tears stopped midair. He stared at her, wide-eyed, like he'd just seen a miracle. For the first time since takeoff, there was silence. Not the silence of sadness, but the silence of connection. Liam blinked, unsure if what he'd just seen was real. The little girl smiled again and slowly signed. Hi, my name is Emma. Her hands moved with a rhythm, like a silent melody only Liam could hear. Liam's tears glistened on his cheeks as his trembling fingers lifted hesitantly. He signed back, broken, unsure, Liam. Emma's smile widened. She crouched down beside his seat, signing slowly, clearly. It's okay. You're safe. For the first time since the plane left the ground, Liam's sobs faded into quiet breathing. He stared at her, amazed that someone understood. Someone spoke his language. Edward, still kneeling beside his son, watched in disbelief. His jaw tightened, a strange mix of confusion and awe crossing his face. You know, sign language? He asked, his voice uncertain. Emma nodded proudly. My big brother can't hear either. My mom taught me so I could talk to him. Her mother, seated nearby, smiled softly. She's been learning since she was 4. Says she never wants anyone to feel lonely just because they can't hear. Edward's throat tightened. He looked at Liam, the little boy who'd lived his whole life, surrounded by people yet trapped in isolation. Emma took out a small notebook and pen from her pink backpack. She tore a page and drew a stick figure holding a teddy bear. Then she showed it to Liam and wrote under it. That's you, right? Liam giggled soundlessly, nodding eagerly. He grabbed the pen and drew another figure, one with curly hair. Then he wrote, You! The two burst into laughter, hers audible, his silent but full of light. For the rest of the flight, they sat together, drawing, signing, giggling. Emma showed him how to sign friend, thank you, and happy. Liam followed, his small hands mimicking hers clumsily but excitedly. Edward watched quietly. Each gesture hit him deeper than he expected. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his son smile like this. Every move of Emma's hands was like a bridge between worlds. The world of noise and the world of silence. Hours passed, and the flight attendants whispered in amazement. The boy who had once cried uncontrollably was now peaceful, laughing in a language few understood but everyone could feel. Before landing, Emma signed one last thing. She pointed at Liam's teddy bear and then at her heart. He loves you, her hand said. Then she pointed at Edward. And he loves you too. Edward blinked rapidly, trying to hide the moisture in his eyes. As the plane began to descend, he reached out, gently taking Liam's hand. And for the first time in years, Liam didn't pull away. The jet wheels kissed the runway softly. Passengers clapped politely, but Edward barely noticed. His mind was somewhere else. Watching his son's small hand still resting in his own, Liam was calm now, his eyes bright and peaceful. Emma sat across the aisle, swinging her legs, her pink backpack still open, full of drawings and crayons. As the plane slowed, Edward leaned close to her and said quietly, "Thank you." For helping him. Emma looked up, grinning shyly. You're welcome, sir. Then she signed with her hands. He's my friend now. Edward hesitated, trying to mimic the movement. His fingers stumbled. Emma giggled softly. Like this, she said, guiding his hand gently. Her little fingers moved his, slow and patient. Edward felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't just kindness. It was a feeling he hadn't known in years, connection. When the jet doors opened, passengers began to leave. Emma's mother came to collect her, thanking Edward politely. Emma turned to Liam and signed, Goodbye, my friend. See you again. Liam's face fell. His tiny fingers moved quickly. No goodbye. Stay. Emma smiled sadly. I can't, but you'll be okay. Then she leaned forward and hugged him. A quick, warm embrace that seemed to freeze time. Edward stood behind them, silent. He wanted to say something. To thank the little girl. To tell her mother how she had done what even he, with all his power and money, couldn't, but the words wouldn't come. Outside the terminal, as chauffeurs waited with black cars, Edward noticed Liam's eyes still searching for Emma. He kneeled beside him. You liked her, huh? Liam nodded slowly, signing something. Edward frowned. What does that mean? He asked. Liam took out the notebook Emma had given him and wrote. She listened without ears. Edward stared at the words, and suddenly everything around him blurred. For years he had been speaking at his son, never to him. He'd hired the best doctors, therapists, and tutors, but never tried to understand his silence. In that moment, Edward felt smaller than ever. As they walked toward the car, Liam tugged his sleeve and pointed toward a signboard outside the airport. It read, Sign Language Learning Center, enroll today. Liam's eyes pleaded, full of hope. Edward hesitated only a second. Then, for the first time, he knelt down to his son's level and signed with his awkward hands. Okay, we'll learn together. Liam's face lit up like sunrise. He threw his arms around his father's neck. A hug full of the love he'd been waiting to give. Behind them, the plane that had carried them to this moment lifted back into the sky. But Edward knew the real journey had just begun. A week after the flight, Edward Callahan sat in his vast marble kitchen, a place built for luxury. Not warmth. But this morning it felt different. Because across from him, at the breakfast counter sat Liam, scribbling something in his notebook. Edward had promised. And for once he intended to keep it. He turned on his laptop, searching Learn Sign Language for Beginners. Within minutes, a video began playing, a smiling instructor slowly moving her hands. Edward copied every gesture clumsily, repeating each sign until his fingers hurt. Across the table, Liam giggled silently, shaking his head at his father's mistakes. Then he signed something fast, laughing so hard his shoulders shook. Edward frowned, pretending to be annoyed. What's that supposed to mean? Liam took the notebook and drew a stick figure with crooked fingers. Under it, he wrote, You sign like a chicken. Edward burst out laughing, a sound that surprised even him. Days turned into weeks. Every night they practiced together. At first, Edward struggled, but soon he learned how to sign. I love you. How are you? Good job, and proud of you. Each new word felt like unlocking a piece of his son's heart. But there was someone else on Edward's mind too. Emma. The little girl from the plane. He couldn't forget her gentle patience, her bright smile, the way she bridged two worlds without fear. So one evening, after tucking Liam into bed, he called his assistant. Find out who was on that private jet from New York to London last month, he said. I need to locate a passenger, an 8-year-old girl named Emma. She was traveling with her mother. The assistant hesitated. Sir, may I ask why? Edward's gaze softened. Because she did what no one else could. She gave my son his voice. The next morning, while Edward practiced signing with Liam in the garden, the assistant returned with news. Sir, I found her. Her name is Emma Foster. She and her mother live in a small town outside London. Her brother, Thomas, is deaf. She attends a public school that offers sign language programs. Edward felt something stir inside him. Not just gratitude, but purpose. He looked down at Liam, who was showing him how to sign butterfly, and right then he made a decision. Pack a bag, he told Liam that evening. We're taking a trip. Liam tilted his head, curious, his fingers moving. Where? Edward smiled and signed, awkwardly but clearly. To meet a friend. Liam's eyes widened. His small hands trembled with joy. For the first time in years, father and son weren't traveling for business. They were traveling for love, connection, and closure. As their jet prepared for takeoff, Edward looked out the window, at the same clouds that had once witnessed his failure as a father. Now they were watching him try again. The streets of Surrey, London were calm that morning. Trees swaying in the soft wind, children riding bicycles past cobblestone houses, and the faint sound of laughter echoing from a nearby park. Edward's black car stopped, near a modest two-story house with white shutters and a small garden full of daisies. He stepped out holding Liam's hand. Liam looked around curiously, his eyes scanning every corner, hopeful, anxious, searching. Edward approached the door and rang the bell. A moment later, a woman in her 30s opened it. Kind eyes, tired smile. She looked surprised to see them. "Mrs. Foster?" Edward asked politely. "Yes," she replied. "May I help you?" He smiled softly. "My name is Edward Callahan. We met, or rather, our children met, on a flight a few weeks ago. My son, Liam." Before he could finish, a little voice shouted from inside. "Liam!" Emma came running down the hallway, her curls bouncing wildly. She stopped at the doorway, eyes wide, disbelief turning into pure joy. Liam's face lit up like 1,000 suns. He dropped his teddy bear and signed excitedly, his fingers flying faster than Edward had ever seen. "Emma, you!" "I missed you." Emma laughed and signed back, her hands dancing. "You came. You really came." They hugged tightly, two little souls who spoke through silence but understood each other better than most people ever could. Mrs. Foster covered her mouth, touched beyond words. Edward swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten. She changed everything," he said softly. Mrs. Foster smiled through tears. "She does that. She's been helping her brother Thomas since he was born. I guess she just has a gift." Edward watched the children, Liam showing Emma the new signs he'd learned. His movements were sharper now, confident. Emma clapped silently, signing "proud of you." It was then that Edward noticed a small boy in a wheelchair behind Emma, a boy with the same soft curls, eyes bright but silent. "Thomas." Emma turned and waved him closer. Thomas smiled shyly and signed something to Liam. Liam hesitated, then signed back. They both laughed. 4 children's hands moved like fluttering wings. Laughter. Greetings, jokes, all flowing without sound. And Edward just stood there, tears quietly escaping the walls he'd built for years. He turned to Mrs. Foster. "I want to do something for them. For your family, anything." She shook her head gently. "You already did, Mr. Callahan. You showed your son that silence isn't emptiness. It's just another way to speak." But Edward wasn't done. He had an idea forming, something bigger than gratitude. That evening, before leaving, he sat on the porch while the kids played with flashlights and sign language games. He looked at Liam and whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time the world learned to listen, even when it's quiet." He took out his phone, opened his business notepad and typed a single line, "Project Silent Voices, a foundation for children with hearing loss." And then, for the first time, Liam walked up, tugged his father's sleeve, and signed slowly, "Love you, Dad." Edward didn't need a translator. He signed back perfectly this time. "I love you too, son." The stars that night shimmered brighter than ever, as if the universe had finally found its harmony. A month later, the grand ballroom of the Callahan Empire Hotel glittered under 1,000 golden lights. But tonight wasn't about business deals or profit margins. It was about something far more meaningful. At the center of the hall stood a massive banner. "Project Silent Voices Opening Ceremony." Reporters gathered, cameras flashing, guests whispering in awe. Edward Callahan, the man once known for his coldness and power, stood behind the podium, his son Liam beside him. He took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice trembling slightly. "Tonight is not about me. It's about a boy who taught me that silence can be louder than words, and a little girl who reminded me how to listen." The crowd watched in quiet reverence. Behind him, a large screen lit up, showing photos of children smiling, signing and learning together. Edward continued, "Project Silent Voices will fund schools, programs, and communities that support children with hearing loss, giving them education, opportunity, and most importantly, belonging." As he spoke, he turned toward Liam and signed every single word. The crowd gasped. The billionaire, who once couldn't even communicate with his own son, was now signing fluently, confidently, and lovingly. Liam's face glowed with pride. He signed back, "I'm proud of you, Dad." The audience clapped, some even wiping tears. From the front row, Emma waved enthusiastically, her pink backpack still on her lap. Beside her sat Mrs. Foster and Thomas, smiling proudly. After the speech, Edward walked over to them. "Emma," he said softly, kneeling down to her level, "you're the heart of this foundation. You showed me what true connection looks like." Emma blushed. "I just wanted Liam to smile." Edward smiled back. "You did much more than that. You changed both our lives." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small necklace, a silver pendant shaped like two hands forming the sign for love. "This," he said, "is for the girl who spoke without words." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She hugged him tightly. The event went on late into the night. Speeches, laughter, and stories shared in both spoken words and signs. Businessmen pledged donations. Teachers offered to volunteer. Parents cried quietly, realizing that someone powerful finally understood their children's world. When it was time to leave, Edward stood near the window, watching Liam play with Emma and Thomas in the corner. 3 children communicating freely, effortlessly. Mrs. Foster joined him. "You know," she said, "you could have just written a check and walked away." "But you didn't. Why?" Edward smiled faintly. "Because money can build walls. Or bridges. I've built enough walls in my life. Now it's time to build bridges." Outside, the city lights shimmered like a sea of stars. And in that golden glow, a father, his son, and a brave little girl had started something that would echo far beyond that ballroom. That night, before bed, Liam came to Edward's study. He carried a small piece of paper. Emma's drawing from the plane, 2 stick figures holding hands, smiling. He placed it on his father's desk and signed softly, "Promise, never stop helping." Edward bent down, kissed his forehead, and signed back, "I promise." Within 6 months, Project Silent Voices had become a movement. Schools were being built, hearing aids distributed, and thousands of children were learning to express themselves through sign language. Newspapers called it the foundation that speaks without sound, but not everyone celebrated its rise. Across the city, Hendrix Corp, a rival tech company, saw Edward's sudden popularity as a threat. They had once offered to buy Callahan's hotels, and he had refused. Now they wanted revenge. They began spreading rumors, claiming Silent Voices was just a publicity stunt to hide Edward's failing businesses. Fake articles appeared online. Anonymous investors pulled out. Even some board members urged him to shut the foundation down until the media calms. Edward sat in his office late at night, exhaustion written all over his face. He stared at the latest headline. "Billionaire's charity exposed, just another PR move." He wanted to scream, to defend what he'd built with his heart. But what hurt most was that people were mocking his son's story. Then a small knock came on the door. Liam walked in, wearing his pajamas, holding his teddy bear. Edward quickly wiped his face and smiled. "Hey, buddy, shouldn't you be asleep?" Liam shook his head and walked closer. He placed the newspaper on the table and pointed at it, frowning. Then he began signing, fast, determined. Edward watched, his heart tightening as Liam's little hands moved passionately. "They don't understand. We help kids. We show love. We don't stop." Edward swallowed hard, signing slowly back. "I know, but the world doesn't always see truth, son." Liam paused, then took out his notebook and wrote 3 words. "Then show them." The next morning, Edward had an idea, one that came from his son's courage. He called the foundation team. "No press conferences, no statements. We'll show them through actions. We'll bring the world to us." Within a week, they organized the first ever Global Silent Day, a live-streamed event where people across the world were invited to spend 1 full hour in silence to honor deaf children. On the day of the event, schools, offices, and even celebrities joined. The live counter ticked past 20 million participants in the first hour. People posted videos with the hashtag Silent Voices Challenge, sitting silently, learning to sign simple words like love, thank you, and together. Hendrix Corp tried to mock it online, but it backfired. The internet responded with compassion. One comment went viral. "You can't silence those who speak with their hearts." By sunset, Silent Voices had become a global symbol of empathy. At the Foundation's London Center, hundreds of children gathered. Liam stood on the small stage beside Emma and Thomas. They performed a song, entirely in sign language, while soft piano music played in the background as they signed the final words. "We are not quiet. We are heard." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Edward stood at the back, tears in his eyes, clapping harder than anyone. He realized Liam hadn't just found his voice, he had found his purpose. That night, Edward whispered to himself, "Sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's strength the world hasn't learned to hear yet." The world had changed for the Callahans. What began as one father's redemption had grown into a global movement of kindness and understanding. Silent Voices had now built centers in 10 countries, offering free education and therapy for deaf children. The board received an invitation from the United Nations. Project Silent Voices was to be honored with the Humanitarian Impact Award in Geneva. Edward was overwhelmed. He looked at Liam and said proudly, "This is your award, son." Liam's eyes shone. He signed with a smile. "Ours." The night before the ceremony, the Callahans and the Fosters gathered at a small London restaurant. Emma and Thomas were there, laughing and playing sign games with Liam, while Edward and Mrs. Foster talked about future plans. Everything seemed perfect, until Liam suddenly stopped laughing. He pressed a hand to his chest, his face pale. "Liam," Edward said, standing quickly. "What's wrong?" Liam shook his head, gasping silently, then clutched his side in pain. Panic spread. Emma screamed for help as Edward lifted his son in his arms and rushed out the door. Hours later, in the cold white light of St. Mary's Hospital, Edward sat outside the emergency room, his hands shaking. Machines beeped behind the doors. Nurses moved quickly. Every sound felt like a dagger. The doctor finally emerged. "Mr. Callahan," he said carefully, "your son has a severe infection, likely from a viral complication. He needs rest and close monitoring. We've stabilized him for now." Edward's knees almost gave way. Relief and terror mixed in his chest. He entered the room quietly. Liam lay there pale and fragile, tubes running from his arms, his teddy bear tucked under one elbow. Emma sat beside him, holding his hand, her eyes red from crying. When Liam opened his eyes, Edward leaned down, forcing a smile. "Hey, champ," he whispered. "You scared me." Liam blinked weakly, then moved his fingers slowly. "Don't cry, Dad." Edward bit his lip, tears spilling anyway. He took Liam's hand and signed back, carefully, lovingly. "I'm here, always." For the next 2 days, Edward never left the hospital. He worked from the hallway, canceled the Geneva trip, and watched his son's small chest rise and fall with every fragile breath. Mrs. Foster brought food. Emma brought drawings and silly jokes written on sticky notes. "Doctors are just mechanics for humans. You'll be okay because you're the bravest superhero." Liam smiled faintly every time. Even in weakness, his eyes were full of hope. On the third night, the nurse entered quietly. "Mr. Callahan, there's something you should see." She turned on the hospital TV. And there, on the global news channel, the United Nations stage glowed with blue lights. A video message began playing. It was from Edward and Liam's foundation. Then, the clip changed to the children's performance from the Silent Day event. The camera zoomed in on Liam and Emma signing together. The world is louder when hearts listen. The crowd at the UN rose in a standing ovation. Reporters called it the most moving moment in the ceremony's history. Edward covered his face, trembling. He turned to Liam, whose tired eyes glistened as he watched his own image on screen. He signed faintly, "We did it." Edward leaned close, pressing his forehead to his son's hand. "Yes, we did," he whispered. "And the world heard you." 2 months later, spring sunlight poured through the hospital's glass windows. Liam Callahan, once pale and fragile, now sat on the edge of his bed, swinging his legs, holding a small sign that read, "I'm ready." Edward smiled, eyes misty. "You sure are, champ." The doctors nodded with approval. Liam was fully recovered. A week later, an invitation arrived from the United Nations again, this time more personal. They wanted Liam himself to attend the rescheduled event and share a message in sign language to represent millions of children around the world. Edward was nervous, proud, and terrified all at once. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked gently. Liam nodded with determination, his hand signing fast and confident. "The world listened to me once. I want to speak again." On the day of the ceremony, Geneva glimmered under a sky so clear it looked painted. The grand hall was packed, ambassadors, diplomats, journalists, and children from every continent. When Edward and Liam entered, cameras flashed everywhere. But this time Edward wasn't the star. It was his son, the little boy who once cried on a plane because no one understood him. Liam walked onto the stage, Emma and Thomas by his side, both wearing small pins shaped like hands forming the sign for love. The crowd fell silent. A soft melody began to play. The screen behind him showed images of children from Silent Voices schools, learning, laughing, signing. Then, with his small but steady hands, Liam began. His message appeared on the big screen as he signed each line. Powerful, gentle and pure. Once I lived in silence, not because I wanted to, but because no one knew how to hear me. Then one day someone spoke with their hands, and my world came alive. I learned that silence is not loneliness. It's another kind of music, one that your heart has to learn to play. Every gesture was poetry. The audience sat frozen, not a whisper, not a cough, just hearts listening. My name is Liam. I can't hear your voices, but I can feel your kindness. And I want every child like me to know, you are not broken, you are beautiful. When he finished, Emma signed beside him. Together we make the world louder, without sound. The entire hall stood up. Applause thundered. But Liam only smiled, because he couldn't hear it. But he could feel it. He felt it in the warmth of faces, the tears, the energy that vibrated through the floor and up into his soul. Edward stood at the edge of the stage, hand on his heart, tears streaming freely. For the first time, he wasn't crying out of guilt, but pride. That night, silent voices became a symbol of global unity. Dozens of countries pledged to introduce sign language in their education systems. When the ceremony ended, journalists crowded around. "Mr. Callahan, how do you feel?" one asked. Edward smiled softly and signed instead of speaking. "Proud, father?" The interpreter beside him translated the words, and the hall erupted once more. As they left, Liam tugged his father's sleeve and pointed upward to the sky. He signed slowly. "Mom can see, right?" Edward nodded, tears welling again. "She can, son. And she's proud of you too." Liam smiled, that same glowing, innocent smile that had once lit up a plane full of strangers. 5 years later, the name Silent Voices had become a beacon of light across the globe. From the deserts of Africa to the snow-covered towns of Norway, schools, hospitals, and communities now used sign language as a universal expression of love and empathy. And it had all started with a crying boy on a plane. Edward Callahan stood at the entrance of a new Silent Voices Global Academy in London, a vast, sunlit building with murals of hands signing hope, unity, and love. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was moments away, and beside him stood two people who had changed his life forever, Liam and Emma. Liam was now 11, tall, confident, full of light. He wore a navy blue jacket with the foundation's logo, his fingers moving gracefully as he chatted with the children gathered around. He wasn't the deaf boy anymore. He was their leader, their voice. Emma, now 13, stood beside him, her curls tied neatly, eyes sparkling with purpose. She had become a youth ambassador for Silent Voices, traveling to schools and teaching sign language to hearing children. Her brother Thomas now walked with the help of a lightweight exoskeleton device donated by the foundation, smiling proudly as he waved to the crowd. Edward watched them all with quiet awe. He had built empires of stone and glass before, but this, he realized, was his true legacy. As the ceremony began, Edward took the stage. "I once believed success was about power," he said, "but my son taught me that real success is being understood." He paused, turning toward Liam. "And he also taught me that silence can speak louder than any words." Then he stepped aside. Liam and Emma took center stage, ready to perform their new piece, The World That Listened. Soft music began to play, the same gentle melody that once accompanied their performance at the UN. But this time, the audience was even larger. Thousands in person, millions watching live online. Through their hands, they told a story of loneliness turned into connection, of fear into courage, of silence transformed into strength. When they signed the final line together, "The world listens when hearts speak," the crowd rose in thunderous applause. Edward's eyes welled up again. He looked toward the sky, the same sky he'd once stared at helplessly from a plane window, and whispered, "Thank you, Emma. And thank you, my boy." After the ceremony, reporters crowded around. One asked Emma, "You're still so young. What do you want to do when you grow up?" Emma smiled and signed, "Teach the world to listen." And Liam added, "And speak with kindness." The moment was captured in a photograph that would later circle the globe. Two children signing beneath a banner that read, "Silence is not emptiness. It's understanding waiting to be heard." Years later, people would tell their children about the millionaire's deaf son who cried on a plane and the little girl who spoke with her hands. They would say that the day those two met, the world learned how to listen.